Well, hi, you guys. I'm Rick Dancer. Welcome to Get Real with Rick Dancer. And we got a great show tonight. I love this topic. I I don't know why. I think it's just because the underdog, and I'm a big supporter of rural Oregon. And rural Oregon is any place that's probably outside of Eugene, Springfield, Salem, Corvallis, Portland, um, Clackamas, all those, everything, those voiceless people. And I think that started for me when I ran for office. And I remember one time being at a debate, and former Secretary of State Phil Keisling met with me, and he told me go to every county elections clerk you can in the state over the next 9 months and ask them what to do. So I got into a debate with Kate Brown, and she said, we need same day voter registration. And I said, well, how many counties do there's places in Oregon that don't get their mail every day. She's like, what? And I said, yeah. I said, like Vail, Oregon, they only get it every 3 days. And I said, and just so you know, Vail is in Oregon. And she looked at me funny. And then I said, how many elections clerks have you visited? Multnomah County, Washington County, and Clackamas County. I said, oh, I went to 26 of the 36. And they say your plan doesn't work. And those counties were so voiceless, and they felt so much not a part of Oregon. You go to Rome, Oregon. Yes, there's a Rome, Oregon, and a Jordan Valley. And these people they listen to Idaho news. They're really already part of Idaho. They go shopping in Boise. They don't feel like Oregonians because they're so separate. And they're ignored. And I had a rancher where the environmental community in Portland came out and never visited, but found out that their cattle were, getting water out of the Owyhee River. And after 150 years, these families have been doing that, and they came out and fenced it off. So one of the ranchers said she went to Portland to fight it, and she stood on the edge of the Willamette River and looked 30 miles up and down and saw nothing but concrete and pollution, and said, and you're going to come tell me how to manage my river? And that's the thing that is driving the greater Idaho movement. So we're going to talk about that tonight with Matt. He's with the organization. He's a spokesman for them. But we want to thank our sponsors. First, BS Free MD. We're going to play a little clip from them tonight, and it's a little racy. I'm just going to warn you. At their show this week, they were talking about all kinds of stuff, and this is really fun. And that's what they're all about. BS Free MD. They're doctors. They're from Sweet Home, Oregon. Super smart, and they're not afraid to push the envelope. And they've been seeing all this stuff coming out about no more natural gas stoves and all this kind of stuff, and they just went on a tangent. So you're going to love that. Also, Albert Taylor, Endless Possibilities, an organization that Mark has some really good insight. These are people that work with folks in our community who have different abilities, but he has some really different insight for people looking for a job. He's going to have that at the end of the show. And then Chris Stendel Family Dentistry and Denture Center, where everyone's welcome. Michael is also an outspoken person, not afraid to take the heat. And he's really big on looking at education in Oregon right now and what is not going on and how the last 2 years impacted that. So that's all coming up. But I want to show you one thing really fast. Guess what I got to do today? I have never been on the Canyon Ferry. There's Canyon Ferry Lake right outside my house. And I've never been on it because we've been too busy. Well, today, I went out there to do a story with ice fishermen. Watch.
Says I can't walk on water. This is Canyon Ferry Lake. Kathy and I have never been on it in a boat, but our first time on Canyon Ferry Lake is on a four-wheeler. That is so weird. Have you guys ever gone ice fishing before? So we're out here doing a story for the Lions Club. I'm going to show people what this is all about. And the cool thing about this is you're just out in the middle of nowhere, and people are just, we're going to go find out if they'll just talk to us. And when I was in Oregon, 9 times out of 10, I could just get people to talk to me. They didn't care. And so far, so good. So we'll see what happens.
So, yeah, that's where rural people in Oregon are just like people in Montana. It's so fun. And here's Matt McCaw. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Rick. Thanks for having me on again.
Hey, I saw your press release, and I know that we haven't talked since after the election. And I was telling you earlier when we were chatting, I have seen and heard from so many people, and I want your insight on this that we talked about, who've said, I think their last holdout was Christine Drazen or Betsy Johnson. And now we have Tina Kotek. And I think that so many people feel like this is just going to be Kate Brown 2.0, and they're done. And now all of a sudden, something that seemed absolutely crazy when you and I first talked about this a couple of years ago is all of a sudden starting to make people go, especially in rural Oregon, think, you know what? Maybe this is an alternative here. Are you seeing the same thing?
Absolutely. So, Rick, people love our ideas. So I talk to a lot of people about Greater Idaho and all over Eastern Oregon. And when people hear our idea, it makes sense and they like it. What they don't think is that it's possible. And so people are like, well, that would be awesome, but it could never happen. And so but despite that, we have a lot of support. When we put our idea in front of voters, voters say, yes, we want that pursued. I think that with this last election, conservative voters in Eastern Oregon, because Eastern Oregon is very conservative and
Right.
they vote conservative and they've voted conservative for decades and they keep voting for state government that they don't get. I think that they thought because of the political environment, because of a third party candidate, there was a lot of people that thought this is the chance. This is a chance for conservatives to take back state government in Oregon. And this is going to be it. And when that failed to materialize, I think a lot of people realized Oregon is too left-leaning and too populated on the west side for Eastern Oregon to ever get the government that they actually want. And so people have always liked our idea, but now they see, hey, we need to really, put some effort behind this and make this push and make this happen.
So the latest county, and I think we should explain to people too. I think sometimes conservative, that term becomes Republican. And that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of conservative Democrats on the east side because my grandparents were from Haines, Oregon. These were old Kennedy Democrats. And I think that the new progressive left far-leaning wing is totally alienating those Democrats in even the Valley. And there's no balance in Oregon. There's absolutely, and when I was running for office, that's what I heard all the time from people. We have no voice, in the rural counties. So Wallow County, like one of my favorite Oregon counties of all, only one stoplight in the whole entire county. That's little. What did they just do? That's what I saw in the press release.
Right. So we've been going for the last 2 years, we've been going to the Eastern Oregon counties. We want to move 15 counties from Oregon jurisdiction into Idaho to get Idaho state governance. So we've been going county by county and asking voters, do you want your elected leaders to look into this? So Wallow County just got their ballot measures. So they were out gathering signatures. We turned in those signatures to the county clerk, and their ballot measure is approved. So Wallow County is going to be voting on this in May to be our 12th county in Eastern Oregon that's said, yes, we do want to look into moving the border.
So you have 12. Out of there's really like 15 rural counties that
There's 15 full counties that we want to move. So you have some counties like Deschutes County where we're not looking to move all of Deschutes County because Bend is a pretty populated city and it's gotten much more it's culturally it's more similar to the west side, and we don't think that they would want to be part of Idaho, so we don't want to include them because our movement is all about matching people to government that they want. And so we would carve around Bend in Deschutes County and then also Warm Springs Indian Reservation. So there's a couple counties that would just be partial, but the 15 full counties, Wallow County will be our 12th one to vote on it, and we're expecting to do well there. And at this point, Rick, we've proven that the people in Eastern Oregon like this idea. They see us as a solution. I've heard talk my whole life living in Oregon. There's this huge urban-rural divide, and I've heard plenty of talk about how partisan things are and how divided we all are. We're offering people a solution. It doesn't have to be this way. Right. We can change state governance, and we don't have the east side having policy forced on them that they don't want. And we don't have the west side having the policy they want held up by those of us on the east side. We just had this measure 114 that just passed in Oregon. razor thin. It was like less than 51% of the vote. And I'm sure you know, Rick, and your listeners know that Eastern Oregon voted overwhelmingly against this. Like when you look at the ballot results and the election results, it's like 75, 80+% Eastern Oregonians voted against this measure. But it passed statewide based on the population of Western Oregon that wanted it. And so Western Oregon said, we want this legislation, we want this policy. And then Eastern Oregon, a judge in Eastern Oregon said, nope, we're stopping that. Rather than these two sides of the state that are so vastly different and culturally so different, trying to dictate policy to each other and playing tug of war with the state government, makes far more sense to just move the border and get people the government they want.
Allie wants to know, has Lake County voted on it?
Lake County did, and Lake County was our strongest county we've had. I think that they voted in favor of our measure around 75%, somewhere in that ballpark.
Well, I love Lake County. Those are the kindest people. Plus, they're, you're like an hour and a half from anything big, Klamath Falls and stuff. So you really have some independent-minded people. Jackie says, you go to Eastern Oregon. I'm so jealous. I live in Tillamook.
I hear that a lot. So one of the things we hear is because there's still a lot of conservative people in Western Oregon. It's just they're overwhelmed numbers wise. If you look at especially Northwest Oregon, the way they vote, it's 65-70% voting left leaning, and so I hear that a lot from people all over Western Oregon say, is there any way to get Yamhill County in? Can what about Polk County? What about here? How can we be part of this? And our proposal is what makes the most sense to us. We have this huge contiguous, chunk of land that's all very, very similar culturally, politically, economically to Idaho. So that would be, that's the starting point is to move what makes the most sense first.
And a lot of people, I think the only candidate for governor that I heard say anything about this was Betsy Johnson. And she would say, we've got people who are ready to move the border, and that's a huge problem. Of course, she's from Scappoose, and she's really a rural Oregonian. But I didn't hear Christine Drazen saying much about it, and I obviously didn't hear Kotek saying anything. And I think that's what people are so frustrated is because, I hear this from Valley dwellers all the time. Well, if they don't like it, then why don't they just leave the state? And it's like part of that problem is that bugs the hell out of me. It's like the people they're talking about, most of them have family heritage that goes back 150 to 200 years. And these are little snotty nosed people, little Californians that moved up here and said, this is my Oregon. It's like, no, actually, it's not your Oregon. You made it your California Oregon. And these people have roots that go deep here. And yeah, they're not any better than you. I'm not one of those, if you're a native, you're better than other Oregonians. But true Oregonians used to be independent-minded people that would, if I were governor of Oregon, this would be one of my big concerns in this state is bringing that state together. But I don't see that from Kotek, and I didn't see a whole lot of it from anybody but Betsy.
They asked all three governor's candidates about us, and you're right. Betsy Johnson said, hey, we've got a real problem where you've got half the state, geographically, is much less than that population was, but you got all these people that they're ready to change state governance. They feel so unheard and so frustrated with the policies coming out of state government. But they asked all the gubernatorial candidates, and essentially they all said, we want to bring people together, and we want to, keep Oregon and work with rural and the urban side. But in Eastern Oregon, we've heard talk like that for a long time, and we haven't seen any kind of policy results that would make us think that it's going to be different moving forward.
It's not going to be different, and that it's all bullshit. It's just like words, and it's the same thing you guys have heard forever. And Matt McCarl was on here saying it's yeah. What about us in the West? We're stuck, And I think that what you tell people about the poll in the press release, there was a poll, and I think most people probably haven't heard about that.
Yeah, so there was a poll done by Survey USA, which is a national pollster and this was a poll that was done of Northwestern Oregonians. So this did not ask Eastern Oregonians. This was just like Willamette Valley, Northwest Oregon. And that was done in January of last year. And it was about Greater Idaho. And it asked them a whole bunch of questions. But there were some really surprising answers. And one of those answers that I saw that was really encouraging to me was they asked, should the state of Oregon look into moving the border and what that impact would be on Oregonians? And 68% of people in Northwest Oregon said that we should look into this. People understand, Rick, if you've lived in Oregon for longer than 6 months, you know that the west side and the east side are completely different from each other. And so people understand that, and they understand completely why Eastern Oregonians are not happy with the policy. We're getting policy forced on us all the time by Northwest Oregon that it may make sense for Northwest Oregon. It may be what Northwest Oregon wants. It doesn't make any sense for us. We don't want it. And so, but the people understand that. And that what that poll did was that showed us that your everyday person, they get it. They understand that it doesn't really make sense for Eastern Oregon, which is 63% of the land mass, but only 9% of the population. It's so rural. It's so vast. Our way of life is so different. It doesn't really make sense for us to be having policy dictated to us from Portland. And so that shows people understand that, and people are ready to have that conversation.
Well, and I think after this last election, that if I was the governor of Oregon, I'd be super concerned about that, because you have now, this is like, I think it's really rubbing it in the faces of people after, because now it's like, okay, everybody knew it's been years and years since there's been, any kind of Republican representation, but now it's just over. And you're seeing people, like me, get the hell out of the state. You are having people move in, but most of those people moving in are coming into urban Oregon and they're more of that kind of policy. And I like how you said that, because I think that's a way I'd like to say that too, is maybe some of that makes sense for some of Western Oregon. So you create a state where this is what you guys want. And that doesn't mean you're bad people. It means this is what you want. But don't hold the rest of us hostage to the ideas that you think work for your area. And we can move to other parts of Oregon. There's other places we can go that we can still love Oregon. But I think people are kind of like, no, this is Oregon and you won't change it. It's like, you already did. You already changed it. Don't
people get really stuck. They get really stuck on Oregon looks a certain shape on the map. And that's what they think. When they think Oregon, they think that's that shape. And what we're saying, what our movement is about, is that, a core principle of American democracy is matching people to government that they actually want. And
it used to be.
Well, and it still should be. And that's what we're saying. So what we were just talking about, Northwest Oregon is very left-leaning. It's very urban. And they should have the government that they want, that they think that they need to solve the problems that they have over there. But the same thing is true of Eastern Oregon. We should have the government that we need, that we want, that matches our values. And right now, because those two cultures are so different, it doesn't work. And that border was placed there almost 200 years ago. I was doing some reading about the border and about the Oregon Territory. So really interesting, right? Like in the early 1800s, you had this huge Oregon Territory that included Idaho and Washington. And then they decided, okay, well, we want to carve off Idaho. We're different. We want to have our own, area. And then Washington came along and they said, well, we're different from you. We want to have our own area. So they carved Washington off. And that's how you got this shape of Oregon. At that time, Rick, there was only 50,000 people in the entire state of Oregon when that border was first placed almost 200 years ago. It made sense 200 years ago. It no longer makes sense where it is. Borders can change. Borders should change. Just because they've been in a certain place for a long time doesn't mean that that's where it makes sense for it to be.
So how do you get that to happen? I mean, I think it's interesting. I don't think a lot of people understand how messed up this is, because I learned when I was running for Secretary of State with redistricting. And redistricting is supposed to happen so like-minded area communities are put together to vote. Well, now what the progressives have done is loaded it so that, like when I lived in Camp Creek in Springfield, which is very rural, I was in the same group with University of Oregon students. Well, what
Right.
do we have in common looking to think? So the whole, I mean, it's cheating. And what they were doing was trying to water down the conservative votes. So we've cheated and drawn lines unfairly in the entire state. How do you, Matt, get those legislators who are totally fine with it? Because, and even DeFazio, when they changed the 4th congressional district, he had a soundbite where he said, well, we've changed the district, so it should be pretty easy for Democrats to get. And you're going, come on.
Right.
So how do you convince, first of all, the state legislature to do the right thing? And then you got to go to Senator Ron Wyden, who already said, we're not letting go of that territory, and get them to understand you don't represent those people well. And besides, Ron, you live in New York State. You don't even live in Oregon.
Right. So there's several reasons why it would make sense for Western Oregon to let Eastern Oregon go. There's financial reasons. So a lot of people don't understand that Western Oregon is wealthier than Eastern Oregon. And so because of our state income tax in Oregon, what ends up happening is that they collect taxes across the state, they redistribute those out. But because Eastern Oregon is not as wealthy as Western Oregon, it ends up being a subsidy. Western Oregon ends up subsidizing Eastern Oregon to the tune of a few $100s per person. So financially, for Western Oregon, if they were to let Eastern Oregon go, they would have all those tax dollars that they're currently sending to Eastern Oregon that they would stay at home. They could use that for education, for homelessness, for the problems that they have in Western Oregon that are specific to Western Oregon. They could keep that. They could keep those tax dollars there.
You know what, Matt? I'll bet you. Here's my proposal. So let's say it's $200 per person, right? That they're paying for taxes in Eastern Oregon.
Yeah, and we estimate it's higher than that. It's closer to $500 probably.
Okay, I'll bet you that many of those rural Oregonians would pay another $500 to get out of Oregon.
I'll bet you're right. And
I bet you could go to those rural Oregonians who are looking at this and going, you know what? We lose the 500. I'll give you the 500 for the first 2 years. Right. And you let me out. I'll buy my way out of Oregon. And then we redraw the line. I mean, seriously, if they're so worried about budget money and stuff, I'll tell you, I'd pay.
Well, I know personally I would. That sounds like a great deal to me long term, especially just the tax benefits for an Eastern Oregonian to be out of Oregon's taxes and into Idaho's tax structure. But we talked about that survey earlier. That was one of the questions that was asked in that survey of Northwest Oregonians was, how much would you be willing to pay to keep Eastern Oregon as part of Oregon? And only 3% of people said they'd be willing to pay what they have to pay to keep Eastern Oregon as part of Oregon. Most people, the highest response for that question was most people would pay nothing. Like most people don't realize they're paying anything subsidizing Eastern Oregon, and they don't want to be subsidizing Eastern Oregon. So when they find out they are subsidizing Eastern Oregon, they said, we don't want to pay anything to keep them. Let them go.
We need to change the conversation because you're good. You made some great points here. Is one, I don't think people know that they're paying for Eastern Oregon. So Eastern Oregon, and excuse all my Eastern Oregon friends because I love you dearly and I love your land. I would have lived there if it was out of Oregon. But you're a ball and chain to the people in Western Oregon. So you start selling that idea and then letting people know this is how much it's costing you. And they want out, and so there's like a buyout thing. And then you tell your legislators, I know you guys sent a letter to the new leaders, both, and your problem is they're both Democrats because the Democrats still run the state. Right. And so you have to get them to allow that to be, because people want that to be discussed in the legislature, but the Democrats have control of doing that, and they have everything to lose by doing that.
Well, so yes and no. So we're hopeful, and we've reached out to Senate President Wagner, and because that's where the bill is introduced in the Senate. So Senator Linthicum is our sponsor for the Greater Idaho bill, and
that's already been done.
And that's already been done, and he's already filed that, and it's been read on the Senate floor. So now it's sitting on the desk of Senate President Wagner, and he'll kind of decide the fate of what happens to it from there. And we've reached out to him, and we would love to sit down with him and talk about, all the reasons it makes sense for both sides of the state. It's a win-win for both sides of the state. But, we're hopeful that Senate President Wagner will hear what the people in Eastern Oregon are saying. And we have gone to the people and we've said, do you want this to happen? And the people have been saying over and over again, yes, we do. We want out. We want to have this conversation about where we could redraw the border and change state governance. And so, we are hopeful that Senate President Wagner will hear that and say, we need to have this conversation. The people in Eastern Oregon don't feel represented. They want something else. Let's have this conversation.
It seems to me you need to get a letter writing campaign. And I'm not just saying Eastern Oregon, but if every person in Eastern Oregon, and then all of you freedom-loving people in the Western Oregon who believe that these people should have the same voice as people in Western Oregon, you write a letter too and put some pressure on these people. These are political people, and they're like the snotty people in college or in high school that wanted to be popular. So they want to do they want to look good. So you have to go in there and say, if you want my support as a voter and as a person in Oregon, you better do what I ask you to do. And I'm asking you as a Western Oregon person to look into this, because I want to know what's best for them and for me as an Oregonian here. And
Yeah, and that's what we're encouraging our supporters to do, and we have supporters all over the state. It's not just Eastern Oregon. Like I said, when they did polling, 68% of people said, "Yeah, we get it, and we should look into this." So people in the state understand how it doesn't make sense for Eastern Oregon and Western Oregon to be playing tug of war over their state government. So that's exactly what we're asking our folks to do. You're right. Our elected leaders they're responsive to hearing from things. I get a chance in this role to meet with a lot of elected leaders, and they do hear. And when they hear from people, they are responsive to it. Like they try to, do what people want them to do. And if there's a lot of people that are writing in and saying, we want this to happen, they will listen to that. And we do, Rick, we have some Democratic. So we reached out to all of the senators and representatives in the state. Knowing that this bill was coming and knowing that Senator Linthicum was going to take this up and move this forward, we reached out, Democrats, Republicans, East Side, West Side, and we have had some Democratic senators and representatives that have met with us, and they said, we get this, we get why this would make sense. We're listening, we're willing to have this conversation. So it really would be a win-win for both sides of the state. Western Oregon is different than Eastern Oregon. And so Western Oregon should have the policy Western Oregon wants without Eastern Oregonians messing that up or putting that on hold or blocking what they're trying to do. Let them have the government they want. Let us have the government they want. And all the political tension that you hear about, the partisan divides and we're so polarized, all that goes away if we don't have what we feel like is policy we don't want being forced on us by people that don't get us.
Right. And I should apologize. Not all those people in the legislature and they're trying to be popular, but because there's a lot of really good serving people, Democrats and Republicans and independents who want to serve. My point really was that they need your support as a voter to stay and do what they do. So there is some of that little sucking up thing that has to happen with people, and take advantage of that, because there's 4,000 bills being introduced this coming session. And this is one bill, and it needs to stand out. And it's not going to stand out if all Oregonians don't do their homework, instead of just locking down and going, no, you can't have part of Oregon. Well, you know what? That's not really your choice, because we are still a free country and we're a place where people should be able to have the kind of governance that they want. And it would be interesting to go back and see, when was the last time Eastern Oregon really was represented well?
It's been a long time. It's been a long time. So this goes back quite a ways, but when I was a kid, basically, I can remember when, we had a Democratic governor, but our legislature was Republican. The Senate and the House was Republican. And so you had this split, you had representation, and you couldn't just force policy on one side or the other because we had divided government. I don't know when exactly that switched over to where the House and the Senate started getting so democratically controlled. But, you know, we just got out of a supermajority situation.
Right.
We are now, and this is part of the reason why our proposal makes so much sense and why people are latching onto it, is because we've been trying to vote what we want in for a long time. And not only have we not gotten closer, we're getting further and further away from having any representation. And so if that's going to continue to be the trend, rather than be a political minority for the rest of our lives, we're saying, you know, it doesn't have to be this way. We have a right to have the government that we want and consent to the government that we've got. And we don't want this anymore. We want to be governed by Idaho.
And it's kind of like I think, you know, you get back into rural, this is off topic a little bit, but back into Western Oregon, I think what's kind of disheartening to me is it did used to go back and forth, you know, a lot more, even nationally. You know, I mean, Mark Hatfield was from Oregon. He was a Republican, and Daniel Inouye was a Democrat from Hawaii. They both served on the Senate Finance Committee. And when one party ruled, when the Democrats won and ruled the House, then Daniel Inouye was the chairman. And when it came back to the Republican side, Mark Hatfield was. And they said to me, nothing ever changed because we were so in sync with each other, knowing that both sides had to be represented. But see, that's so gone right now. It's like,
Yeah.
And I think the supermajority would, and then the sad thing to me is it happened from cheating, in my own opinion, of redrawing district lines. And why don't we get back to, you know, really what makes people frustrated is when things aren't fair, when it's not the truth, because the truth, I think right now, truth is like the most important thing. It has to be the top standard of everything. More than love, more than anything, is what is the truth, because we've been lied to so much. Mm-hmm. And I think rural Oregonians feel that more than anybody is where does, you know, when do we just make it fair so so everybody gets to have a chance, and we don't load one district up and move these people. And, you know, even last session, there was a Democrat who got ousted out because he thought the way they redrew the line. So they redrew him out, and he was one of theirs. You know, I mean, that kind of stuff has to stop.
I completely agree 100%. And, you know, this kind of goes back to talking about how we're going to get this to the next step and get this through the legislature as well as that, you know, sometimes I think that elected leaders get into this Republican versus Democrat. It's a party thing, and it's what's best for our party. And you know, that becomes their focus. And that's not your typical citizen's focus. It's not your typical citizens, you know, your typical voter doesn't really care about the Republican or Democrat party. They care about policy, and they care about what things affect their life, but they don't want to see a district gerrymandered to ensure that you get a Republican or a Democrat elected. Right. They want what most people I think happens is that you have districts to groups like-minded people together so that they have representation that matches their values. That's the whole point of it. It has been corrupted and it has been used instead to serve these two parties rather than to serve the people. And our movement is part of taking some of that back. It's saying, you know, we are free people that have a right to have government that we want and consent to the government that we want. And so we are going to ask and work through the political process, but we're going to say, you know what, we want to make this change and we have the right to that. And so, you know, we need to look into it.
You know, Matt, the largest growing block of voters in Oregon is the non-affiliated voter, not an independent, because people get that wrong. Independent is a party. And they play their little games too, because they'll support a Democrat candidate or this candidate, you know, and it's all just a game. But most people in Oregon now are non-affiliated voters. And so you're right. They don't care what the Democrats or Republicans want. They care about what's good for their family, what's good for their community, and about having a voice in their government. So maybe all this will come to a head. And maybe our legislators will look at this and say, you know what, we really do have to do something, or we're on the verge of splitting up the state. I think it's already split up anyway, but there's, you know, and wouldn't it be nice to, I mean, people yell at me because I'm, you know, calling it left. We need to come up with a new term, is that radical group of people who don't care what anybody, and they end up on each side but it just happens to be that the one on the left right now is in control and in power with so much stuff. And I think the rest of us feel like, I never thought I was such a radical, but it's like all of a sudden to have your voice. That's my problem, Matt. I was a voiceless kid, and my whole life has been giving people a voice through television, through news, through whatever.
Sure.
And so now when they start taking mine away, it's like, you're going to see kicking and screaming here. And then my old friends go, I always thought you were more rational than that. And I said, you never pushed me this far.
Yeah. And coronavirus, I think, helped supercharge this movement because it was everything was so extreme. As you're talking about, like for a long time, people could say things like, politics doesn't really affect my life that much, and then coronavirus happened, and it's like, it was so stark and so apparent, out here in Eastern Oregon during that whole time, we were being shut down and locked down, and kids kept out of school and masked up and all these things. But right over in Idaho, that was not the case. Their lockdown was very short. Their kids were in school, going back to school right away. I can remember, I went golfing for some reason in Oregon. Golfing was still an approved thing you could do. You could still go golfing with friends. So I golfed a lot because it was one of the things you could actually go do. But I was golfing with my cousin, and he's like, yeah, I was, just in Boise, and I went to church. There's 500 people there. And then we went to, lunch afterwards. And at that time in Oregon, you couldn't do any of those things.
Right.
So that was such a stark,
and
example of how government does impact our lives and how much power it can have over our lives, and how important it is to have government that matches your values. Because if you get government that doesn't match your values and they have that much control over your life, you're in a bad situation.
Well, it's a lot different when you're in Gillum County or Sherman County.
Absolutely.
And you have 5 people with COVID, and then you're in Portland where you have thousands and they're all around each other. And that it's a whole different world, and you can't treat, well, we're all Oregonians, so we're going to do this together. Well, it's like, no, you can separate these things and make them different. And if you won't, then that obviously got people real frustrated. I mean, the county where I live right now, they said they were in masks for a couple of weeks, and then everybody just took them off and went about their lives, and it was no big deal. And when we came here in January last year, Oregon was still in masks until April.
Mm-hmm.
We were living here without masks, and I had COVID twice, and it's kind of like I love how you said that you need representation that kind of sees your values and what you're doing. And I wish you luck, Matt. I hope this happens. And I want to I will help you guys with any kind of, stuff you need. I think, as you get going, they keep sending me the things, and I'll keep putting you on here. Cause I think the more that people understand, that there's value and financial value to get rid of Eastern Oregon. Right? You should have a big campaign. Unload them. Unload Eastern Oregon. Make it sound really attractive.
Right.
And if people in Eastern Oregon would not take offense and just be like, you guys, we got to do this to get you out of here.
Yeah. Well, and we appreciate, Rick, for us, part of the struggle is that status quo bias is that people, they think, oh, that's, crazy talk. It could never happen. And so for us, being able to get our message out that, yes, this can happen. There's a legal process. It's not crazy. Borders change all the time. Go look at a map from like 1980 and a world map, and look at all the different borders there are. Borders change to make people's lives better. And we need to start thinking about doing that in this situation where you have 2 cultures that are so different. So it's super helpful for us to be able to get our message out and have people like you that, give us a platform so that we can talk to people about why this makes sense.
If you put together some people, I think I can fit 6 to 8. I think it's 6. I think maybe 6. But I would be willing to have like you, me, and then 4 other people from different counties that have approved this, and not radical, just people that, because I don't want people to go, oh, they're setting this all up, but just people that have a good story about why this would, I would do that for you guys. Cause I've got sponsors that support me, and this would be a great topic to have. And maybe we do them over a series of times with different counties to just show the frustration that they're having and keep talking about these things like that. I would totally do that with you, Matt.
That would be awesome. Yeah. And our people would love to do that because, that is part of the problem also, Rick, is a lot of people in Western Oregon, they really don't know how different life is out here. Like how different life is for somebody that lives in Malheur County than lives in Multnomah County, because they haven't been there and they haven't experienced it.
And then I'm sorry, I know I just I can't help it. But since you haven't been there, people, you need to either go there or just let them have what they need, because it's really, just like that rancher, when you've got environmentalists who have never been to the Owyhee River ruling and dictating how Oregonians use their property, and have used it, and don't count all the lakes that they made out in the desert for wildlife and the cattle and stuff like that, and then start judging them, based on how many cow farts they have. This is, how much methane do all the dogs and cats in the Western Oregon fart into the air, causing methane? And we're looking at their cattle out here and doing the same thing. So clean up your cat shit and your dog poop, and then you can start worrying about the cattle. And maybe it's not the same methane. I'm not educated on it, but you know what? It makes a funny analogy, doesn't it? I'll get some environmental person on here going, methane doesn't even come from cat poop. Well, you know what? There's nothing worse than cat or dog poop when it lands on your foot, and it's all shit. So don't tell me it's not. Hey, Matt, you are such a good, Tom just said on here, more power to you, Matt. You're a great representative. You really are articulate on this, and you've got you make it so normal. And I think that sometimes people can get too complex with things, and you make it really understandable. So I appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Rick. And thank you, Tom. And thanks for having me on. And I look forward to talking soon.
Okay. We'll talk to you later. All right. You guys share this on your page. Matt, I'll talk to you later.
Yep.
All right. So that's it. So one of the things I want you to really understand from that, I know, so not only do Eastern Oregon people need to be writing letters, but those of you in the West, you need to be doing the same thing. And maybe you can't be part of it. And I know some of you are going, well, I can't be a part of it. I want out too. Think of the strengthening that could happen for you too. If this happened, which is one of the reasons it's going to be really, really hard, I think, but if it did happen, it really does say something about what's going on in Western Oregon for you as well as a more conservative person. It's saying something's out of whack. And so we need to be helping these people to be able to go that direction. And then you can make your choice from there, but at least it gets the voice out there. Yeah, Tom, I think you're right. He says a very wise and clear spokesman. Yeah, I agree. Matt is very articulate there. So we can't do this show without our sponsors, and we need you guys' help too, because Facebook and Instagram, of course, our numbers are way up, but it's because I'm not telling everything in the lead of what's in the show. I've learned how to get around them a little bit. And it's really sad because I'm a really good lead writer after all those years in the news, and I have to skate around everything. But if you share this on your page, it really helps us. And then also if you pay attention to our sponsors, because that's how we make a living and are able to do this for you. So I'm going to play their 3 commercials right here at the end. Watch what they have to say. And since Matt McCarl was on here, I'm going to give him a little plug. New Leaf Hyperbarics, one of our one of our elder clients. Matt is doing light therapy there at the New Leaf Hyperbarics. And if you're one of those people, I heard you got rain like crazy. I have really nice sunshine, but it's cold. But light therapy really helps. And so make an appointment at New Leaf Hyperbarics. I'm going to play my other commercials here so you can see. This first one's going to blow you away a little bit. This is BS Free MD, 2 doctors in Oregon do a podcast. And this week they got on gas stoves. I don't know why, but here you go.
So when you look at this, the electricity has to come from somewhere, because when you plug something in to a wall, it doesn't come from magic fairy dust and unicorn farts. It comes from a place like a hydroelectric dam, a nuclear power plant, or God forbid, the most common source of electricity in the United States, coal. Okay. So when you're driving an electric car, you're driving a coal-powered car. Yep. Not an electric car, a coal-powered car, because you have to go to the base source of energy. So, okay. So if you have an electric stove, now you have a coal-fire-powered stove instead of a natural gas stove, which is way more efficient and way less polluting.
Unless you have hydroelectric.
I wish Tim would really tell us what he thinks. When he holds back like that, it really bothers me. Their podcast again is called BS Free MD. It's on Spotify, any other place you want to find it. They talk usually about medical stuff, but they're just a super joyous couple, really nice people. Here's Dr. Bratlin.
Answer. The midterm elections did not turn out the way many of us had hoped. So what can we do about it? Support local businesses that prioritize freedom of speech, tougher crime laws, and values that support a healthy community, not the same old song and dance that's gotten us nowhere. Even though my wife and I moved to Montana, we still come back to Eugene to see Dr. Michael Bratlin at Chris Dental. He says what he believes and puts his money where his values are by supporting those brave enough to push for change. And best of all, he and his team are just awesome. So if you've been thinking about changing dentists or you just don't have one, you need to go to Chris Dental. Call them today and they'll do their best to see you today.
That what this kind of work offers you is an opportunity to see things from a very, very different perspective. And something that you will build into your portfolio of life skills and life experiences that will change your outlook, I think, frankly, for the rest of your life. I know that sounds very dramatic, but I think it really is. I think it is very, very real. We are demonstrating that we value this work, not just with words, but also economically and all, and being able to provide to people a place that you can make a decent living and you can do something that is not only important and meaningful, but you can also provide for your family as well. And so as you go out there, and what I would say to, especially to young people, look at your next steps, is look at what the pandemic should have taught you, is that life is very fragile. Things are very fragile, and you're going to be out there and you're going to be working for a long time. And so what I would suggest to you is choose work that is meaningful. When you look at it, don't just look at how much money you can make and all those things, but also look at what kind of a legacy am I going to leave? Am I going to make a difference?
And for those of you who don't know, Albert Taylor works with people in our community who have different abilities and helps them have lives like what they dream of. And what better job could you have? Well, except mine. Okay, so I am taking Monday off. It's Martin Luther King holiday. And so we will be back on Tuesday, and we've got a whole bunch of great shows coming up for you next week and the week after. Got everything scheduled out for you. So share this stuff on your page, you guys. Get it around there, and really just have a great long weekend if you have one. And whenever your time off comes, enjoy yourself. All right. Have a good night. I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.